Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Thor. Honestly, for Thor, it is kind of hard to review this one because honestly, out of probably most of the superhero origin stories, this one I think is the most skippable one. But, like, to just kind of justify this story, if nothing else, I think the only interesting part about this movie is to see how happy and go lucky Thor is, because in further iterations of this character, how much of a shell of a man he will be, and how many drastic changes that this character goes through as the more he loses things that are big, impactful things, like family members, Asgard, and a number of other things. Somewhere down the road, he's to lose it all. But so Thor is to realize in this movie that Thor needs Asgard more than Asgard needs Thor, because Odin still exists at this point in time. So, so honestly, Thor needs to realize the value of Asgard to where when we get into sequels, that he's willing to fight for it and keep it alive as best as he can up until a point where he's fighting against fights that he just clearly can't exactly win, but also that he just has to figure out a way of becoming more than just the god of thunder and have people question who the god of he is anymore because of how much he's no longer a threat to anybody. So I'd also come to find in this movie that I don't find Loki to be threatening ever in the MCU. If anything, Loki is to be a guy that is just to be smarter than people, yes. But Loki is not really a threat. Like, past this movie, he has to kind of be partnered up with people. And also, even when he is to be a good guy, he still has to be partnered up with somebody. He can't just do it all alone. He even has to even go on and be partnered up with his variants in the Loki show. So yeah, like he can't do anything actually alone. But anyways, we have Thor that when he is to really think that he knows better, or that he doesn't need to listen to his father anymore, that Thor just thinks that he is to, like, well, hey, I should be king now. Like, I should have already become king now. And Odin is like, well, if you are to really think that you deserve this, then you should not have it. Because that should be the thing that he should really be learning here. That, like, that he is to realize that, again, that Asgard is valued to, or that that Asgard is a value to Thor and not the other way around. So, and also when Odin strips away Thor's power and becomes like everyone else, that again, he's not special. And no one will take him as being special because he's no longer to really have the power of a god. And so, if anything, people will write him off as like, oh, well, he's cut or he's good looking. and nothing more. Um, until he has to go on and fight his way through a shield uh, crash site tent. And Coulson is like, "Well, what training did you get received? Like, you look like a soldier of fortune." Anyways, so let's go on and let's try to break down this movie as best as I can. So, with that said, in the very Cliff Notes version of this movie, we come to find that Odin and Laufey had been fighting one another, and eventually they come to conclusions of getting to peace. Because at some point, Odin and Laufey realized that it's all about the realms coexisting and not fighting one another to the death. And I would go on and see another iterations of Asgard where they're endlessly fighting, to where I can understand why that Asgard is have to be so combatively skilled the way it is, because of how they always endlessly fight. But you don't see that really at all much going on in these movies enough. Uh, because we eventually push to what the real threat of Asgard is, and then we kind of forget that Asgard is always under attack. But anyways, so Thor is to inevitably disregard Odin's wishes after frost giants have made their way to Odin's vault to try to steal the casket of ancient winters. And Thor goes off to Jotunheim to battle the Jotuns. And when Odin has to go on and save Thor, and Thor is telling Odin, "Yeah, we can go and we can take them all out together," and Odin's like, "No," like, evidently, again, you still don't get it, that it's all about the nine realms coexisting, and you can't wipe a realm out. It just doesn't. It just, like, if you take out one realm, like, it'll kind of weaken all the others. So, Odin comes back to Asgard to strip Thor of all of his power and call him a spoiled child. And this whole exercise is so that way finally Thor can learn how to grow up and no longer be this spoiled child. And for Thor to call his father an old man and a fool, by the end of the film, Thor does finally realize what Odin was talking about. Instead of calling him a fool anymore. It's like, no, you're actually right. And I understand that now. So, because things finally for Thor click. Thor goes off to Earth as he smashes into a modified van that has uh, astrophysics equipment on it. And we then have Jane Foster that goes on and says, "Please don't say that you're dead." Kind of like we see in the very beginning of this movie, that they reiterate here. So, Thor is to be taken to this hospital by Jane and Eric and Darcy, and to be thought nothing of. But then they find out through their instruments, like, wait a minute, that guy was within the Eisenstein Rosen Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge, the Bifrost Bridge, whatever. And so Jane is to realize how valuable that Thor actually is, and wants to figure out what his story is. So the more that he tries to explain to these people, none of them really can believe his story, but Thor also is to go on and explain about the worlds of science and magic and how they're all kind of the same, and explain the Tree of Yggdrasil with all the realms, and probably help us really as viewers probably understand Thor's world and how he has to have an understanding of it. But so as Thor is to have landed onto Earth, and Mjolnir is to have crash landed onto Earth also. All of a sudden, Coulson is to find Mjolnir very valuable, and is to put a whole crash site around it, a whole tent thing around it, and is to explain to Fury that he's found something, like he had gone on to say at the end of, I think, Iron Man 2, and this end credit scene, that he had found something. We're like, okay, what the heck is that? Within Mexico. So, expecting us all to watch every one of these movies because we kind of had to at that point. Now we can kind of be more pick and choosy and have movies flop because not all of them really matter at this point. So, Thor is to realize that Jane is to lose all of her technologies because Coulson and Jane's uh what's the perfect word here? Uh what they're working on is very similar, and also they don't want Jane to know something before they do. So they're taking all this equipment away from her. So Thor decides that he's going to go on and steal all of Jane's equipment back, and then find Mjolnir and fly out with it. But Thor needs to realize that he can't win every battle. And that Thor also needs to realize that he's not good enough. And so, as Thor makes his way to Mjolnir and realizes that he can't lift it, that he's not worthy enough of it, Thor realizes how valuable Mjolnir was for him. And so, again, like, this is when Thor is to realize that all of this stuff was actually very important, and he just squandered away all of it. So, by the time that he does get to Asgard, he really does appreciate Asgard and his father and having Mjolnir and all these godlike powers, because they can so easily be taken away from him. So, Thor gets arrested by Coulson and asks where he's received his training, and then Loki appears to explain to Thor the state of Asgard after he has gone to left, because Loki could kind of tell Thor anything and he would probably believe it if Thor is to look at Loki and see that he's looking very convincingly enough of what he's saying to him. So, I don't think I said that properly. So, what I wanted to say was that, like, Loki is a really good liar, and Thor would probably buy into whatever his brother says, because, like, well, hey, it's my brother telling me this. Why can I not believe it? Like, once Thor finds out what Loki told him is all a lie, and Thor has been so betrayed by his brother and he doesn't understand why. But even so, when Thor is to go on and ask Loki, well, why are you doing this? And Loki's like, well, I never wanted the throne, but I never also wanted you to have it either. And Loki always wanted to be Thor's equal, and it was just never going to happen. So, like, for Loki, I'm still very much curious about why he did what he did. Uh, was it to just be just jealousy? Was it just to be that Loki isn't really a threat to anybody, and so Loki wanted to be more threatening, and so his usurping of this whole taking over and killing Odin or trying to earn his father's love and and have him try to become king no matter what, even though he will never get to that. Yeah, like I'm still trying to figure out Loki. I'm still trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together for this specific movie. After the window of that, like we get to Ragnarok's and such anyways, where it kind of becomes moot because of what happens with Odin and what eventually happens to Asgard, where it becomes a people and not a place, and how Thor eventually never really is to be meant to become king anyways. That it also doesn't really matter. Like that somebody just really needs to just become a face of Asgard, but not really a king of it. But anyway, so after Thor goes on and faces the Destroyer, after Lady Sith and Warrior 3 make their way back to Earth to explain to Thor how Loki lied and how Loki is going to seek the Destroyer to kill Thor and Earth, and Thor has to become worthy enough to do what's right and go back to Asgard and face off against his brother to save Asgard because he values it now. And then Thor is returned to his father by the end of all this, and like, yeah, I have a lot to learn. So, yeah, and I kind of very rushed through that through the end, but I also kind of rushed through this anyways because I'm trying to quickly explain all this. So I've really tried it in a number of ways to try to explain this movie, but it's very difficult because it's kind of it's a skippable movie. It's a movie that like I don't think will hold a lot of weight to people, so I probably should just be rushing through this. So that way I'll go on and I'll get to other bigger projects down the road, like the Captain Americas and the Dark Worlds and the other things that it seems to be really very much more interesting to people. But anyways, I think it's about that time to get more into the nitty gritty details of this movie. Anyways, thank you all for checking this review out of Thor. And hopefully, I will go on and be able to do a lot more superhero projects down the road. Let me know in the comments below what's be your favorite superhero movie of any kind, whether it's DC, Marvels, or even the kind of the smaller independent books, whatever. Uh, if anything, I'm hoping to probably after this to probably start to also this is gonna be time capsuling this, so I hate to say it, because it won't after the sickest recording, it won't really last very long. My plan as far as the other kind of superhero things is to obviously start to be covering like the Captain America movies, the Fantastic Four, eventually Spider-Man and Avengers projects. I think will eventually be a thing after I've kind of covered a lot more of the other MCU projects. Uh, I want to try to at least get every like starter of most of these movies and things, even though every one of them will probably have some kind of MCU connection somewhere of something that I didn't completely watch and review on here, but it's whatever. Uh, this movie kind of takes place after Iron Man 2 anyways, so I was kind of like just randomly just watching this one and be like, what the heck, why not just check out this film? So let's get into the full-on breakdown spoilers of this movie. I think it's about that time to get into spoilers. I think I'm going to pause this here, and then I'll go on and I'll get my notes and everything. All right, if I haven't done the song and dance already, spoiler time, at that time, spoil this movie. Yeah, I'm putting on these glasses because honestly, my eyes been really hurting lately. It's probably because of all of the screen stuff that I've been going into lately. A lot more lighting I've been using in areas and like everything across the board. Is like I've been way over stimulating my eyes with how much of just projects I've been doing lately. So yeah, just my eyes just really hurt to the point where I try to avoid getting either as much migraines as I'm getting, or clearly I just have to start wearing sunglasses just so it can kind of break down a little bit more of like the pain that my eyes are just straining to deal with right now. So with that said, uh, yeah, I hope like that's probably honestly the reason why lately that I did a little bit less of projects, as well as also I've had a very long day today. But again, just whipping out the violins. But I'm just being very honest with people. Um, of like, if there's any reason why I've kind of been slowing down lately, it's clearly because my eyes freaking hurt. They really hurt. Um, so my apologies for kind of going on and kind of cutting corners or kind of doing easier projects. Clearly, that's the reason. But anyways, or doing stuff that is a lot more familiar with me instead of kind of going on into to brand new stuff or whatever. Uh, but anyways, let's get into this. So we cut into New Mexico, and we have Jane that is putting up her astrophysics gear onto the top of the van, turning some stuff on, and Eric and Jane are like waiting for something to happen. Jane says, wait for it. So uh, Eric goes on and cracks a joke about how they aren't storm chasers, but really this kind of feels like this is what they're doing at this point. So they all of a sudden see this subtle aurora in the sky, and then they start driving towards it, and the more they start to swerve around in this fog, Darcy ends up getting more and more upset by like, man, they're driving like crazy, and she doesn't think that 6 credits is worth risking her life, and and so it's all a kind of really just complaint about Darcy anyways. So the further and further they drive, here's where Thor smacks into the van, and then Jane, Darcy, and Eric thrust out of the car looking over Thor, and here's where Jane hits Thor with "Do me a favor and don't be dead." Now we cut to Norway in 956 AD. Here's a scene, and I'll go on and I'll kind of fast pace through this. So this is the scene where both Odin and Jotunheim, or the Frost Giants, or Laufey, they're in Norway. They're going onto this big battle, and the things we see is like we see specifically Laufey that's attacking some of the Asgards, and then we see Odin that has this like I think this like huge spear or something, where he's going on and cutting down some of the frost giants, and I also think that it's really interesting how like Odin also talks about how like Midgard or the people of Earth thought that they were the only ones on the universe. If anything, uh, for Asgard and all the other realms, they know better. But anyways, so because if anything, uh, like the characters of Odin and Thor and Loki and whatever, they were all written off as myths and legends. Uh, but that kind of also gives me a flashback of like the Ghost Rider movie, where it's like, yeah, some of these things are myth and legends, but some of these legends are true. Anyways, so Odin goes on and speaks and narrates this story about how he had struck a peace treaty with the Frost Giants, and so after that he had gone on to return to Asgard, and so Odin is going on and telling this story, and he goes on to tell this story to both his sons Odin and Loki while they're in the Odin vault, or the weapons vault, as I think Thor goes on and says that it is. So Loki is curious if the frost giants exist because they haven't gone on and actually seen them, as well as also Thor is to mention how he wants to take all the frost giants and slay them, because of course he does. And so Odin goes on and says, no one is to seek out war, but they always will be ready for one. So Odin goes on and says that both of the kids were born to be kings, but Thor is to be the only one that's going to be the king of Asgard, whereas, if anything, maybe Loki could be the king of the Frost Giants in Jotunheim, because he will never be one of Asgard. I think also in What If they explained uh, that episode away about of what if Loki never actually became Thor's brother. I don't know if I've said that already. So here is the ceremony, and enough time has passed where we see the Chris Hemsworth version of Thor instead of his young child counterpart. So Thor comes in with the only time we ever see him with an actual helmet on, besides Love and Thunder. Because, yeah, did he have Dark World? No. Any of the Avengers films? No. Uh, Dark World, Ragnarok. Well, in Ragnarok, he like battled in that whole gladiator thing against the Hulk, and he had like a helmet on that looked similar to. So yeah, but like it wasn't like the winged one, like we're used to seeing most of the time with a Thor helmet. So I guess that's a little bit different, but whatever. It's still he did wear a helmet technically in Ragnarok, so that's good enough. So, anyways, so Thor goes on and flings his Mjolnir in the air, and we have Lady Sif that is kind of going and rolling her eyes at Thor because of course she is. So Thor goes on and looks around and starts to see the Warriors Three just kind of like off to the side. Hey, hi guys. Hey, yeah, yeah. I guess we're here for some reason, right? Like this isn't going to be a waste of our time, right? So, so Odin goes on to explain who Thor is, as if no one really knows who he is. I guess that's for probably the viewer to understand that Thor is to be the son of Odin, to be his heir. Um, not this kind of hair. It's a joke. Stupid joke. It's a dad joke. So, and also it's to explain that like since Thor is going to be the firstborn, that he's going to be the first one to become king. So here's where also Odin explains about Mjolnir, how it's to be a weapon to destroy, but also a tool to build, and uh, a great thing to have for a king. So as Odin continues to talk, we then cut to the Odin vault where we have uh, two Odin guards there to find that the vault is to get a little bit more chilly and a little bit more frozen. So the frost giants make their way to Odin's vault and they get their way to the casket. But all of a sudden, the wall is to have appear the destroyer, and the destroyer takes down every one of these frost giants because, of course, he has the blasting fire attack against frost. Yeah, that would easily wipe that out. So the destroyer comes and takes out each one of the frost giants, and so as Onan is talking his ceremony, he all of a sudden is to realize the frost giants, and because he was going to go on and say that he was going to make Thor king, but instead he's like, I will dub you a frost giant. Like, what? So Odin, Thor, and Loki run to the weapons vault, and Odin is he like, well, they didn't get what they were coming for, so if anything, there was only a few of them that did try to this and they failed. Well, I guess we'll just have to go on and just push this all under the rug. And Thor was like, "What? Like, why are you gonna go in and why are you gonna like forget all this? Like, if anything, look how far they got." And Odin's like, "Nah, yeah, but they failed. Like, yeah, but they didn't achieve what. So who cares?" So Thor is to say that for how far they got and how much they almost accomplished their goal, like it makes Asgard looks weak or vulnerable, and that a lot of people go on and try to do the exact same thing that the Frost Giants did. It kind of it kind of like could go on and accept that behavior, or say, or welcome that behavior is what I meant. That people should keep trying to try to attack Asgard, more so now than ever. So Thor thinks that this could have been an act of war, and Odin says this was an act of a few, and they were doomed to fail anyways. And as Thor is almost say that he is to be a king, and if he were to speculate being a king, and Odin's like, well, that's great that you want to kind of speculate, but you're not really a king. So, like, what I say goes. So now we cut to Thor, who is to take this huge, massive table and what I will call the feasting room, because I don't really know what this actual room is. Here's the thing, folks. I know a lot of you. I want to take this moment here. Like, at least I did say the Odin's Vault, but I don't know every narrow specifics about Asgard, and if they have all kinds of goofy, weird names for every place that you have to go, and every minute, tiny detail of like, because I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I've I did that so many other times in so many other reviews, and it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. Like, there's sometimes that people want me to be very specific, and that just gets just bananas. But also, like, I had tried to do that so much in like Power Rangers and all these other kind of things, and then I would just start to realize how like it really didn't matter that I did any specifics on any of those. So plus also like this whole breakdown of the movie, like I don't think really anybody really cares about it. Like they're just wanting to just find a short video, and that's okay. Uh, but also like I am to feel just very happy when I cover these like this. But even though I try to rush them, but again, uh, I'm not going to go into the narrow specifics about where these people are. Or, like I think also there was at some point where someone was going to go on and tell me that I needed to have talked about more about a very narrow specific thing about a film or a show. No, I think it was a show. I'm like, but why did I need to take the time to to talk about that specifically? Like, I don't know. I think I just wanted to grade the show and just kind of get my feelings out there, but I don't know. I didn't know I had to get into talking about very specific things about certain movies and projects, but I don't know. Like, but everybody probably used to go on and probably have their thoughts about a movie and show and whatever, and they have very narrow and specific things about it. That's why I go and I tell everybody, hey, anybody could become a YouTuber, and probably a lot of people can become a better one than I am. So go ahead and do that. Get the equipment, take the time out of your day to do a very short video, and do it better than me. Try. Anyways, so but I'm not saying that to just be like, oh, like I'm not like I'm not saying it anything more than that. Like I think a lot of people kind of take certain contexts that I don't care. Just try to do this. Everyone try to do it. I'm not saying that you're gonna fail. I'm gonna say that you're probably gonna be better. You're probably gonna be way better. So I hope you are. I hope you will be. I hope you'll be willing to try this. I hope you will be. Because why not? Life is short. Anyways, so After Thor goes on and throws this table, Thor, I think, is more frustrated that he was so close to becoming king, and Loki starts to take advantage of Thor's already bad mood and is basically tell Thor that he was right and there's nothing that Thor really can do besides defying Father. And then Odin's like, well, maybe that's what we should do. Maybe we should go on and we should ensure uh, that Asgard won't get attacked again because we're going to strike back. So Fangirl goes on and explains to Thor how different it is to go to Jotunheim than it probably would like Earth, where Thor can go on and throw a bit of lightning around and he's treated like a god. Like in Jotunheim, they won't respect Thor. And Thor tells Fangirl, it's like, well, hey, we're just going to Jotunheim to investigate. We're just trying to get there for answers. So also Thor starts to turn around to all of the Warriors 3 and Lady Sith and try to like boast them up to get all of them to agree to what Thor has to say. So Thor goes around and starts to ask about Fendrel and Hogan and leading him into battles, how uh, Thor had been able to get Falstag into a number of succulent and delicious feasts, and how Lady Sith had been the one to show everyone that a woman could be the fiercest warrior, but Thor supported her in that in that journey. And so Thor goes on horses with all the warriors to then to be stopped by Heimdall. And Heimdall already knows where they're going. It's like, yeah, you're not dressed warm enough. And I thought that was kind of funny. So Heimdall is upset that somebody had slipped through without him noticing because that's very unlike him. And Thor goes on to tell Heimdall, it's like, well, hey, tell nobody that we are to have gone on and left, and don't tell anybody when we return either. And so Thor goes on and does the Bifrost Bridge, and they talk here what eventually will connect to the third act, because they'll talk about the Bifrost Bridge, about how like they're hoping that Heimdall could just keep it open. So if they end up in jeopardy in Jotunheim, they could just quickly go on and be teleported back to Asgard. And Heimdall is like, well, yeah, I can't do that. Because if anything, that'll go on and that will very much cause uh, destruction of the other realm if I do that. So I can't. Uh, so Well, yeah, because Heimdall says exactly. It's like, well, yeah, like if I do that, I will not only destroy Jotunheim, but I'll take you with it. And Thor's like, well, yeah, I don't plan to die today, and like no one does. So as soon as the Asgardians make their way to Jotunheim, Hogan says that they shouldn't be there, and Thor says, let's move. As they start to make their way through Jotunheim, they realize that there's no frost giants to greet them, and Thor says they're all cowards, so they're hiding away. So, at some point, they finally meet up with Laufey and start talking to him. And Thor asks about the invasion taking place on Asgard, and Laufey talks about how in the House of Odin there's a number of traitors, and Thor doesn't go on and believe what Laufey has to say, and so Laufey goes on and explains to Thor how Odin is to be a murderer and a thief, which, yeah, Odin is definitely to be a thief because he had stolen Laufey's son, but also in war he has murdered a good number of people. Plus, also, we really start to find in other Thor movies that Odin is to hide a lot from his own sons. We come to find out in Ragnarok that Thor and Loki had a sister that they weren't even aware of, a much older sister. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting the more we get revealed of Odin within this story. But anyways, let's move on. So I love how Laufey goes on and says like, "Hey, you're nothing but a boy who thinks himself a man, or wants to prove himself a man, but you're not." So the more and more they start to argue between Laufey and Thor, Loki now has to explain to Thor that they're kind of outnumbered here, and it's time for them to probably leave anyways. And so as they start to leave, here's where the Frost Giant comes on and is like, run back home, little princess. And so Thor goes on, attacks one of the Frost Giants, and then says next. And so we start to see the Asgardians start to scatter here. And we, of course, have Thor's like, make it a challenge for me. I'm trying to do my best Thor. I think at one point they really did a much better Thor. Like, I honestly, yeah, I used to like. I think I used to really do a good. Now I think I'm just kind of like, I'm just trying to mimic kind of the accent, but like it's not as good as it used to be. Man, uh, I used to be good at this. Anyways, uh, so we'd have a one point where one of the Frost Giants tries to go on and tries to tackle Loki, but Loki is to have a fake version of himself, and so that kind of starts how Loki is to kind of use magic. Uh, at one point, here's where Volstagg goes on and gets his arm touched, like, "Hey, don't let him touch you." And here's where Grendel ends up going on and ends up like sword fighting against one of the Frost Giants, and he gets stabbed in the chest, and then ends up having to get pulled off from this bit of ice. Loki tells Thor that they must get out of here, and here's all of a sudden when we have them unleash the Jotunheim beast, the big, massive, uh, like doggish like creature, but it's like a giant, dog like creature. Like if anything, this monster kind of looks like the Ghostbusters, the very first movie, but it kind of gets re-put back into the later films, called the Terror Dog. Uh, but if anything, it's kind of more iconically done in the first movie. Besides the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. But anyways, uh, so we'd have the beast that is scrambling to make its way to the Asgardians, and Thor goes on to use his lightning because there's a number of frost giants that are surrounding him. So Thor goes on and flies up to meet the rest of the Asgardians that are all scrambling to call for Heimdall, hoping that he'll open up the bridge to them. But if I were Heimdall, I would be kind of concerned that if anything, uh, they haven't gotten enough threats cleared off the board. Like, I would be kind of very concerned about the safety of Asgard, uh, than to just kind of open this bridge up so easily. So, Thor is flying into the air and he thrusts through the throat or the mouth of the beast as it has crawled underneath all the Asgards, underneath this, like, this bit of ice underneath them, this thick amount of ice underneath them, and they all are kind of scrambling. So the beast meets up with the Asgardians, and Thor takes it out through the throat or through the mouth and kills it. And then shortly thereafter that, Odin appears, and here's where Thor is like, "Father, we'll finish them together." To where, of course, Odin's like, "No, Thor, no, that's not like so." Laufey looks at Odin's like, "Yeah, you're looking a little bit wispy there, Odin. Like, getting a little tired there." So, but Odin is still trying to look like a threatening presence by telling Laufey, "Hey, this ends now. If anything, this is just actions of a misguided poor boy, and just leave it at that. Just little mistakes." And Laufey doesn't see the number of his frost giants being killed as just something that he can just sweep under the rug. Like, I hate to break it to Odin, but uh Lavi goes on to explain to Odin about how they're beyond diplomacy, and if anything, this is a call for war, and Odin is to then accept that. So Odin is to go on and take all the Asgards back to uh, the Bifrost Bridge and bring Volstagg into the healing room, or the healing room. Man, luckily I got that name right. So Thor goes on to explain uh, that Odin may be very afraid to act on things, and Odin goes on to explain that that's not really leadership talking, and that if anything, that a warrior needs to be a lot more patient. And Thor is saying that the Nine Realms were all laughing at them. And here's where we get, "You're a vain, greedy, cruel boy. You're an old man and you're a fool." I was a fool to think you were ready. You have betrayed the express command of your king through the arrogance and stupidity. You've opened these peaceful realms and innocent lives to the horrors and devastation of war. And so here is where Odin goes on and is to then start to banish Thor, talking about how the things that he is to go on and be unworthy of having. Um, and it honestly makes so much sense for Odin to honestly banish Thor. So Odin goes on to explain to Thor that he's unworthy of this realm, he's unworthy of his title, he's unworthy of the loved ones that he has betrayed. Odin will take the power, and in the name of the Father, or in the name of his father and the father before him, he casts Thor out. So, as Thor now makes his way onto Midgard, here is where Odin goes on and takes Mjolnir and says, shall whoever is to be worthy to possess the power of Thor, or oh wait, whoever is to be worthy is to possess the power of Thor. Well, whatever he says here, because he goes and reiterates it later on. Um, oh, um, whoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. That's what I said. That's what I was trying to say. Anyways, I had to kind of reiterate it from the thing there. So now is here we go back to Jane Foster, Eric, and Darcy, who are to now find Thor and do me a favor and don't be dead. So Darcy goes out like, hey, I can do CPR. Yeah, because Darcy keeps going on and saying how attractive Thor is. If anything, like the one character I can eventually go on through these Thor movies and actually root for is actually Darcy. Weirdly enough, I think Darcy eventually starts to earn, um, like her importance into the MCU. Because I think she ends up being in WandaVision, but also like we come to find that she ends up being in stuff like What If, as they kind of partner her up with Howard the Duck, weirdly, and they have a child together in What If. I don't know why that happens, but it happens. It's also kind of really fun when there's this one really funny bit where Darcy and Howard the Duck are talking to their kid in What If, and they keep going to this argument, and then it becomes more and more funny the longer it gets drugged out or dragged out. Not drugged out. Anyways, so uh, so Jane, Eric, and Darcy realize that they need to take Thor to the hospital, and as Thor gets up, he starts shouting out for his hammer. Yeah, we all know you're hammered. We can tell. And so Thor is very confused and he doesn't understand where he is. He's like, what realm is this? Alfheim, Niflheim, New Mexico. Oh, okay. So at some point, Darcy goes on and tasers Thor and knocks him out. And then Darcy says that Thor's really freaking her out, so she tastes his ass. So Eric makes the joke about if Darcy goes on and tases anybody, that he should be in the car at least first. Which makes sense, but also it's kind of funny. So they make their way to the hospital, and so as they make their way to the hospital, they explain that they say that his name is Thor, and they talk about how they hit them with a car and also that Darcy had tased him, and Darcy's like, well, yes, I did. So, as Thor is in a hospital bed, all of a sudden he wakes up as somebody is trying to take his blood, and Thor takes everything as an attack. And as he starts to thrust away from the doctors and security gets involved, and everybody's grabbing onto Thor, Thor eventually gets thrusted against this door, and he's like, "No one can stop the mighty Thor," and he gets freaking knocked out by the sedative. Now we cut to the crash site of Mjolnir. This thing. It crash lands, and so we immediately have this random townie that is to be looking at this crash landed Mjolnir, and it's like, all right, well, let's go on and be like all the Avengers and be like Age of Ultron, where they're all trying to pull it off the coffee table, and the only one that does a little bit of that's El Capitan. But eventually we'll come to find that somebody will go on and be touching this, and it won't be exactly Thor. And I'm not talking about El Capitano. I'm talking about somebody else that'll, at some points in some of these other movies, actually be touching this thing. And I'm also kind of curious who all could touch a little bit of this, if you know what I mean. I would be so curious. Like, I think after this, I want to go on and watch a video about all the people who has ever gone on and touched Mjolnir and actually been able to probably lift it or whatever. Like, I know Thor had gone on to kind of do, or I know Hulk was to go on to be a guy that would be strong enough to be able to do something with Mjolnir, but I don't know if exactly he was strong enough to be able to lift this. But anyways, so now we cut back to I'm going to be butchering the name of this town. Puente Antigo. Antiguo? No idea. So there's a sign of Puente city limits. I apologize. I took the intro as Spanish, but if anything, that kind of got a little bit of lost on me of what that actually says. So Jane and Eric and Darcy are all talking to one another, and if anything, there's a lot of technical stuff here that's like they talk about how Darcy doesn't really understand what they're talking about. It's like, well, wait a minute, I thought you were supposed to be a science major, Eric says, and then Darcy's like, well, yeah, there was no other candidates, so they just hired her along. And so they explain to Darcy what a Einstein-Rosen bridge really is. And so Jane goes on and surmises that it's just a wormhole. And so Jane also talks about how all of a sudden even the stars, when the Einstein-Rosen bridge happened, all of a sudden the stars were from a completely different constellation in some other realm somewhere. And then Jane starts to go on and look at the pictures as well Eric and Darcy do. And they realize in the picture that there's a human body within the Einstein-Rosen bridge. So they must assume that it has to be Thor. And so Jane is like, oh crap, I need to go back to the hospital because I forgot something. The county hospital. So Jane, Eric, and Darcy make their way back to the hospital, and as they try to get back to Thor's room, they find that he has escaped because Thor, when waking up, is to figure out a way to kind of slink his arms from out of uh, the the things that they latched him onto. I don't want to say cuffs because that's not what it was. They just tied him down to the bed. They didn't cuff him. So now Jane is upset because she had lost a very important piece of evidence, which is Thor, that he may be from another realm or world or something, hence why he acts so strangely. And so they realize that Thor is probably going to be the only one that knows anything about that event and any information that they could actually uh, give him about it. And so now they need to just start looking all around Mexico, hoping to find Thor. And as they start to back up, all of a sudden Thor. The very first time I ever watched this, God, did I laugh. Because Thor just pops up from behind the car and he gets smushed by it and he falls over. I'm like, ha ha! So Jane is like, oh, I swear I'm not doing this on purpose. So now we cut to the crash site of Mjolnir to now all of a sudden have all these townies and they've all really made this like a tailgate situation. Like they're grilling hot dogs and everybody's getting a try at Mjolnir to see if they can lift it. Like this is starting to become like God, what is it called? Like the King Arthur story where they're all trying to lift the sword out of the stone. It's the same thing here. So at one point we have Stan Lee that does a cameo and he goes on to try and use his truck to pull Mjolnir out, but all it does is to rip away his tailgate or his backside of his truck completely off. And Stan goes on and says, like, well, did it work? And it didn't. Coulson spots the crash site, and Coulson calls out to, I'm assuming, Fury to say that he had found it. So Thor eventually does wake after getting bumped or getting freaking ran over almost. And so Thor awakes, and so Jane gives Thor a t-shirt, and here's where Darcy goes on and tells Jane how cut Thor is. So Thor looks at the t-shirt and realizes that there's a name tag on it, and it says Douglas Blake on it. And that, of course, to be the reference of the character that Thor used to transform into. I'm sure I said that somewhere, but I'm going to reiterate it here. So people can remember, because it's already been an hour of me going on a talk about it. Or maybe I didn't say any of that. Any of the early parts of that I should have, but I forgot about it. I'm sorry. I really should have gone on and said that earlier. Well, so Thor, after putting the shirt on, is to talk about how he's a little weak and tired, and he needs sustenance. So they make their way to a diner. So now we have the warriors that are the Asgardian Warriors 3 and Lady Sith. I think they're still in the healing room here. I'm not exactly sure. So the warriors and Lady Sith, they're contemplating what really should have been done about Thor, and that probably Thor should have never left either. we have we have Sith that goes on and talks to Loki, and Loki say it's like, well, yeah, like I didn't think Odin was gonna banish Thor for what happened, and Thor is to convince the group here. It's like, well, yeah, I love my brother, um, but you know how he is, like you know how dangerous and reckless and arrogant he is, and it's like him if Thor is to continue to go on in that path and eventually become king, like what good is that for Asgard? So Loki leaves, and Sif goes on a mention about how Loki has probably always been ever jealous of Thor. But honestly, for what Loki did say there, it makes a lot of sense, honestly. Like, you can't really argue with Loki's logic, really. But they're still just going on like, oh, he's just jealous. Like, I think they just wanted to hear what they wanted to hear there. So, shortly thereafter that, Hogan says that, remember what Laufey said about there are traitors within the House of Odin somewhere. So they're kind of pointing the fact that it's like, well, yeah, like Loki is probably that traitor. Or that's the assumption made. So they realized that only magic could have brought the Jotuns to Asgard. And so here's where Loki goes on and takes the casket, and Odin tells Loki to stop. And so Loki says, am I cursed? And Loki's like, what am I? And Odin's like, well, you're my son, obviously. So Loki says, like, yeah, you took a lot more than just the casket that day, didn't you? And Odin goes on to explain, well, yeah, like, I went to a temple and I found a baby, and so maybe that's the reason why Odin decided for peace on Jotunheim. Clearly because, like, he saw this baby, and maybe that was the reason why everything changed for Odin, was just because of this child. And maybe Odin taking this child was just because of the whole peace thing. I don't know, like, if anything, I'm kind of very curious about the whole breakdown of Odin after this. Like, I would have liked to have been a fly in the wall during that scene a little bit more. Or also, like, I would have liked Odin to exactly say his thoughts about how he felt about the baby, and how maybe he was to say that the whole seeing this baby completely thought differently about fighting and killing and whatever, and that seeing this baby made him decide to try to get peace, because he knew that they could bring uh, a complete peace later on, with Loki being eventually one of them. But anyways, because he kind of says that anyways. So uh Odin says that there's no way for Jotunheim and Asgard to have peace now, And so Loki just says that he's a lost relic, and that if anything, Odin was to always just kind of protect Loki from the truth. And here's, of course, where Loki completely understand why Odin really never really loved Thor as much as he loved him, because he never wanted a freak to be on the throne of Asgard. And here is where Odin falls over and he goes into Odin sleep, and then Loki ends up calling guards down uh to bring Odin back to his bed so that he could sleep. A lot of people could probably have immediately said, like, well, hey, why shouldn't Loki go on and take out Odin here and then just take over the throne? And even Loki goes on and admits that, like, well, hey, like, if he goes on and if he were to have killed his own father, then Loki would not be able to go on and justify taking over the throne, because too many people would figure out what happened and would have a complete mistrust of him, and everything will just disintegrate. It would just, like, no one would go on and want Loki to become king. So Odin and the uh Odin and the scientists, let's just say, Odin and the scientists, Odin's son and the scientists. That sounds like a weird kooky band. So Darcy makes a thing about how Thor had eaten a whole box of Pop Tarts, but he's still hungry. It's like, well, yeah, I'm sure Thor hasn't really gone on and eaten much because he hasn't been human much. Plus, also, we see that Thor in Endgame has this massive stomach to where it's just like, well, yeah, like maybe Thor, like, always is to just be a guy that just eats everything and never really gains weight for how much he fights in battles and what. So, like, also, like, if you think about it, if Thor endlessly fights, like, I'm sure he easily burns through all that. So I'm sure he eats a ton, but he fights so often that he easily burns it all off. So maybe he's just gotten so used to so many meals a day that, like, it's kind of like a bodybuilder, where a bodybuilder, come to find out, you have to, like, eat like several meals a day. And I'm like, holy like 5 or 6 meals a day. I'm like, wow. And that is to be like a really daunting task to just think about it. It's like, man, like, I can only eat a couple uh meals a day, if that. Like, I maybe can do 2 meals. Maybe sometimes I'm just having like a meal and a half. Because I'm just like, yeah, I can't really eat a lot. But anyways, so so Thor goes on and drinks this beverage and then crushes onto the ground. And Darcy, uh, Jane is like, why are you doing that? Like, if anything, you're breaking stuff. And Thor is like, okay, well, I won't do it again. Like, you have my word. So, so, let me pause here for a second so I can find my footing of where to go here. Okay, I figured out where to go quickly. So, like, isn't this where the guy comes in about the whole satellite thing? So, We have this drifter that's just to be called a man number two, that makes his way into the diner and starts talking about how he had found this piece of satellite that crash landed and it was very heavy. He tried to lift it and couldn't lift it. So Thor, after kind of overhearing this, is to be like, well, where exactly was that? And it's 50 miles west of here. So Thor starts walking out the diner, and Jane and Eric and Darcy start following him. Like, well, hey, where are you going? And Thor is like 50 miles out from here. And so Thor starts to offer if he will get a ride from Jane, he'll tell her everything that she needs to know. But Jane is unwilling to go on and give Thor a lift. So he's like, okay, I'll figure something out. So Eric goes on and also turns to Jane, uh, and everything that Thor is talking about just doesn't make sense. That it's all from a book as a child, and that also Thor is dangerous. Um, and so that's also the reason why they left. So as Jane makes their way back to the Smith Motors, or their laboratory, all of a sudden all the Shield members are collecting all of their stuff, and they meet up with Coulson. Coulson is to go in and explain how they're taking all their equipment, but he's willing to fund them with a check, uh, of a one-time check to make up for the loss. Uh, but he's commandeering all of their stuff, but they say that it's kind of stealing. So Jane goes on to say about how she can't go on and easily recreate all this equipment by going to some Radio Shack. That also she has a book full of notes, and they quickly grab that also. The more that Jane is to be fighting with Coulson about all this, Coulson is to say it's like, well, hey, we're the good guys here, and Jane is like, well, so are we. So Coulson explains to them thank you for their cooperation. And here's where Darcy goes on and talks about how she had this iPod and they took that. Like, yeah, I just downloaded 30 songs off of there. And so Eric goes on to say how like he's going to email some scientist that has gone on to uh, work with these shield people before. And Darcy goes on to tell Eric, it's like, well, we can't because if anything, they took your laptop. So I'm curious who exactly Eric would have gone on and who he would have talked to. Does that come up anywhere? I don't exactly remember. So Sith and the Warriors 3 make their way to Odin, hopefully to try to convince them to reconsider banishing Thor. As Sith and the Warriors 3 make their way to to Odin, all of a sudden they find out that Odin is not in his crown, in his seat, that if anything instead it's to be Loki, and he is to be an interim king while Odin is of course sleeping, doing the Odin sleep. So Loki explains to the warriors here that Frigga is to be kind of concerned that Odin may not wake up from this sleep because at some point he's been pushing off for a very long time. So it's kind of a concern about that. But so and even the warriors are to go on and ask Loki if they can even speak to Frigga, and Loki's like, "Well, no, like she's on the bedside of my father, taking care of him." So Loki goes on to say to the warriors, like, "Well, hey, if you have any urgent matter, please bring it up to me." And he goes on and says, like, "You're king." Like, ah, ha, ha, ha. So the warriors go on and like, "Well, obviously we're gonna bring up Thor." And Loki, like, since you're king now, you're interim king, then how about you bring back Thor back to Asgard? Thor. I'm sorry, I very viciously get problems with names. Um, it's been very noted. It's anything. Um, it's the whole like I get very confused with like browns and grays. Like I always get those confused. There's sometimes where I start to get a loop of just confusing names because I just don't know names that well. I don't remember names that well, even though I've been saying them for hours. I don't know. It just kind of gets juggled in my mind. Juggled. Uh, it just gets juggled in my brain. Um. Anyways, plus I also my the more I talk, things just kind of get just jumbled up. So I apologize. So Loki goes on to say to the group here. Plus, also I need to probably much more slow down to kind of do this a little bit better. Loki explains to the group that he will not go on and undo the last act that Odin did. And also considering they're against a war against Jotunheim, it'd be in their best interest to not bring Thor back anyways. So, plus also, Loki is to talk about continuity and, if anything, uh, the more that they are to try to like ask Loki if he could reconsider and all these other things, Loki is to just go on and be like, nope, I'm not going to change my mind. So we make our way back to Eric. Eric is to be thumbing through books, and then all of a sudden he is to find a Norse mythology book, and he starts to turn the pages and starts to see pages of Thor and rainbow bridges and all these kind of things because he wants to bring this to Jane to show him how much of a joke this all really is, and for Jane to not take Thor very seriously. Here's where Jane is following Thor to this pet palace because Jane is going to find Thor because Jane thinks if anybody can go on and get her back her tech and her notes, it's got to be Thor. Thor goes into the pet palace asking for a horse, and the guy's like, "We don't have nothing like that here." And so Thor's like, "Okay, get me a animal big enough for me to ride." And then Jane appears and then brings Thor into her car. Jane is willing to agree to take Thor wherever he wants to go, which is to be the place of which that he wants to get to Mjolnir. And Thor is saying to Jane how brave she is for what she's doing, that she's taking a risk and she wants to get back everything that was stolen for her. And so Thor goes on to say, it's like, well, hey, like, I'm willing to give you everything back to you and then uh, regain Mjolnir. And Jane is like, well, how are you going to go on and accomplish all that and then walk out of there? And Thor is like, well, I'm not going to walk out of there. I'm going to fly out of there. So Jane's like, well, I hope you're not crazy. Also, Thor goes on and starts to talk about the Rainbow Bridge, and also that whenever Thor talks about the realm that he's in, and he even uses words like realm that she doesn't understand why he's using it. Thor is like, well, yeah, you think me strange. It's like, yeah, because no one really talks like this. So now we cut to Odin. Odin is now sleeping, and both Frigga and Thor are talking about how Odin has been consistently holding off the Odin sleep for a very long time now, and so honestly, his collapsing makes the most sense because they're making it more sense in the film via this dialogue. So Loki is to go on and ask Frigga about why Odin had lied about Loki not really being a normal Asgardian, but instead being a frost giant. And Frigga is like, well, Odin never wanted you to feel different, like you're different from all of us, and that you're nothing more than our family, because really that's what you were. Also, this scene here sets up very well the Dark World. I don't want to spoil the Dark World for anybody, but yeah, like there's a reason why I talk about both Loki right here and Frigga, because we'll come to find that Thor and Loki really have a strong connection with their mother, and even if Loki is to be a bad guy, he never would want anything to happen to Frigga because of how much he really did truly love his mother and did not really care for Odin. Um, and eventually in the Dark World, we're going to see how pissed off that Loki gets um, because of his strong connection with his mother, let's just say. Uh, Anyways, you probably figure out what I mean by that. If you haven't seen The Dark World, check it out right after this one, of course, because you want to watch things in order. I love watching things in order. That's why I'm watching Thor instead of Thor: The Dark World, which I think will probably be more impactful probably in this channel because for some weird reason it was very impactful in the other channel, but I who knows now. Um, Kind of when I go on and when I redo all these things over and over again, they are to definitely lose their value. But I don't know. I'm hoping that if I do videos that are just kind of impactful enough, that they'll do well. But I have no idea at this point. Um, I wish I was more. I wish I was more sure about things. Uh, but I'm not. I really am not. But anyways, we cut to the crash site. We cut to the shield tents. So we've already talked about the whole flying out thing, and I thought that came earlier, but I guess it comes later. Oh, here's where we get Agent Sitwell. That'll be a much more important character uh, in Captain America: Winter Soldier, not in this film. But also we'll see Sitwell from time to time. I think in like What Ifs and other kind of projects. So they'll eventually bring him back for things. But again, the only time that I think he's really important is just Captain America: Winter Soldier, as basically just this Shield character that a lot of people probably won't remember until it's finally time for him to actually have some actual real things going on in the story. Um, so if anything, like it's well, I don't want to ruin Captain America: Winter Soldier. Uh, but like if there was any Asian person that kind of felt like he's been kind of connected in so many projects, it feels very much like Sitwell has. Uh, even so much more so than Coulson. But with what Sitwell really is by the end of it all, it's kind of hard to really say that he's gonna be a person that they're gonna have him become the new Coulson if no one else. I wish that they probably would have set up somebody else to be the new Coulson, because also, you could probably say it's like, well, what about Maria Hill? Maybe you guys may not be fully aware of the MCU. Um, yeah, who could have gone on and actually been the new Coulson? Like, we could obviously say maybe Hawkeye is going to be the new Coulson, or we could say that Steve Rogers, if he's not a evil villainous character, is going to be the new Coulson. Could be any number of people. But anyways, so Thor breaks through this fence and is to be wearing a poncho after he takes out a number of shield guards and starts to make his way through this tent and starts taking out shield members. Coulson ends up calling out that he needs a guy from a high point with a gun, but that's not how this guy works. Hawkeye goes on, he grabs a bow and starts to get to a a high position by being in this little like human-sized bucket that is to kind of be kind of roped up to where he's kind of just in the air kind of balancing in this big massive like bucket of a thing. So as a number of shield members are getting down, it's kind of fun hearing Hawkeye's banter about like you want me to slow him down? If anything, I'm starting to root for this guy. Like, are you just gonna go on and get bring in more guys for him to beat up? So here is where Thor meets up with a guy that equals to his size. So at first, this guy goes on to take Thor down, but he's like, "Oh, you're big, but I fought bigger." Thor, I think, tackles this guy down to the ground, starts kind of just elbowing him, and then does this drop kick to really nail him down. Oh, here's where Hawkeye says the thing about the rooting for this guy. Uh, but also, Hawkeye explains to Coulson that he needs to call it now. So here's where Thor gets to Mjolnir, and Coulson tells Hawkeye to wait because he wants to see what happens when Thor gets the hammer. Thor goes on, grasps the hammer, and realizes that he'll not be able to pull it, that he's not worthy. So Thor looks out into the skies and cries out. He doesn't yell out for his father, he doesn't yell out for anybody, he just yells. Shortly thereafter that, Coulson arrests Thor, and then they bring him into an interrogation room. Heimdall is looking on at what's going on, and so while Thor was going off to get to the crash site, Jane was calling Eric, and in a very funny way, she was to apologize to Eric. It's like, well, yeah, I did the thing that you told me not to. I'm sorry, but I did it. So, so after Jane comes back uh, to the Smith Motors, here is where Eric uh, goes on to hand Jane that weird Greek mythology book. It says how goofy everything is, and then the next thing we see after that is Coulson interrogating Thor, trying to figure out where he was to have gotten his training, and that he looks like a soldier or fortune type. Coulson leaves, and here's where Thor is to be greeted by Loki, and Loki says to Thor that he had to see him, and Loki goes on to explain to Thor that it's like, I need to tell you some things. Loki goes on to explain to Thor that Odin is dead, and that if anything, because of the threat of this new war and Thor's banishment, like it all became a little bit too much for him. And so Loki also mentioned about Mjolnir, about how Thor will never become worthy and will never be able to lift it. And also uh, that Loki is now king. Thor ends up asking if he can go home now, and Loki's like, no, like nobody wants you back. Like Mother is still mad at you and wants you to be completely exiled. So this is goodbye. So Thor tells Loki, thank you for coming here, and they say their goodbyes. Coulson opens back up to start interrogating Thor again, like, goodbye, like I just got back. So Loki makes his way to try to lift up Mjolnir, and he can't lift it. And so Sitwell goes on and makes his way to Coulson and explains that Eric is here to try and pick up Thor. So Eric explains that Thor is Douglas Blake, which is kind of funny anyways, because that's, in some ways, it's kind of true for some iterations of Thor. So I think that that's really just funny. So Eric explains to Coulson about how Blake was to be very frustrated by all the stealing of this equipment, that he would go on and say how like Shield was to have been uh, these military booted thugs or whatever, and and I thought it was kind of funny, and how this is such a faceless organization and da 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 da. So Coulson goes on and asks, like, well, hey, how is it that this guy has the skills the way he does? how is it that he's so strong? And Eric is like, well, steroids, and he's a fitness freak, so that's why he beat you. So they look at Thor's identification, and they obviously realize it's a fake. So Coulson is willing to let them go, but he's like, nah, we're gonna have somebody tailing this guy. We're gonna follow him. And eventually Coulson will go on and meet up with Thor, like, yeah, I don't think you went on and you told me the absolute truth of who you really are. So, but if anything, I like how Eric says, like, he's a wonderful man. He's a man in pain. Anyways, so uh, so Eric goes on and is to continue to pretend that Thor is Donnie or Donnie. So the two of them leave, and so Coulson says to Eric, it's like, hey, don't let him go into any bars. And Thor goes on and notices the notebook. He grabs it for Jane, so at least she doesn't have to start all over again. Thor ends up asking Eric where are they going next, and Eric says to a bar. Exactly uh, what Eric was told not to go by Coulson. The two of them go to a bar, and so they start getting to a point to where Thor is to be very confused. That if anything, he was hoping that where he was to go was to give him answers, or that if anything, he would figure out how to have the right questions. And there's a lot of just stuff that is kind of be throwing around in this bit of scene here that kind of it really sounds cool, but also it's just like, what the are they talking about? So Thor thanks Eric for what he did there, and Eric's like, well, I just did it because Jane told me to. And Eric is like, well, yeah, I'm really very protective of Jane, and if anything, like that's why I'm going on. I'm going to tell you that if anything, like I'll give you a couple of beers, but if anything, it's time for you to hit the road after that because I'm trying to protect Jane. So they get two Boilermakers and they start drinking. Thor starts to look at Eric as Thor will not go on and won't dip down his glass. So both of them completely chug this huge thing of beer. And next we see that Loki is to have bifrosted his way to Laufey to go on to explain that he was to have been the traitor in Asgard. And Loki goes on to explain to Laufey how Laufey is going to come in to Odin's bedroom and kill him while he sleeps. And Laufey's like, well, why don't you do it? It's like, no, like if anything, it'll just look really bad if I kill him. So, and Loki will protect Laufey from being seen also. So as we come back to having Loki meet with Heimdall, Heimdall thought it was kind of strange because there was no conversation that he could have heard Loki making with Laufey. And so Loki is to tell Heimdall, it's like, well, maybe your disability isn't as good as it used to be. So So also Loki is to go on and ask if Odin ever feared Heimdall, and Heimdall's like, well, no, because I was forced to obey my king. And so Odin's like, so you're gonna obey me now because I'm technically king right now. And Heimdall's like, well, yeah, I kind of have to. So here is where we have Thor that brings in Eric and chucks him into what looks like an RV. And here's where Eric goes on and says, you aren't the god of thunder, but if anything, you should be. So after Jane starts summing some things around in this RV, she asks if the two of them should go outside. I think they go onto the rooftop of this building, or it looks like a rooftop like spot, but I'm not quite sure. So Jane goes on and explains about how this spot is special to her. That she always kind of goes to this place when she needs to think, or when uh, she needs to get away from Darcy, who drives her crazy. So after a bit of talking here is where Thor eventually gets out this notebook and starts to talk about the tree of Vitrasil, and also how Jane could be able to go on and see things with a Hubble scope or Hubble telescope. Uh, and so here is where the Warriors finally decide that they're going to go to Earth and find Thor, but they're very worried that Heimdall will find out exactly what they're doing and will probably imprison them for the knowledge that he knows what they're doing. Immediately, we have one of the Asgardian guards that has the Warriors meet up with Heimdall. And so Heimdall goes on and asks the Warriors, like, hey, be honest. Are you guys going to go on and are you guys going to perform treason to free to get to Thor so that way you can bring him back here? And they all say yes. And so Heimdall's like, well, okay, I'm just going to let you go on and do what you're going to do, and I'll walk away. And they're like, well, wait a minute, how are we going to go on and how are we going to activate the Bifrost? And then all of a sudden the Bifrost activates anyways. The Warriors all teleport. They Bifrost to Earth, and so Coulson and the Shield members are to find out that there is something going on 50 miles northwest, and so they're like, okay, let's go take a look at this. So now we cut to uh, Thor, Jane, Darcy, and Eric, and it looks like they're making breakfast, and they're getting everybody just ready for the day. So we cut to Loki, and so Loki makes his way to the destroyer and explains to the destroyer he wants him to go on and destroy his own brother and make sure that he doesn't return, and then destroy everything else. So all of a sudden, we have two Shield members that are just waiting because they're doing a God, what is it? The stakeout um, over Thor's place, because it's like, well, yeah, we're gonna follow him. So All of a sudden, the warriors and Lady Sith make their way through town. And so we have the shield members that are going on and calling out how there's a couple of weird looking guys. Like there's a Jackie Chan, there's a Robin Hood, there's a this and that. So there's a Xena warrior princess. So so uh as Jane and Thor and Eric and Darcy are all talking, all of a sudden there's a smacking of these windows, these doors, and all of a sudden all the warriors all come to greet Thor, and Thor is so happy that they're all there. But also, uh, Thor tells him that they should not have come. Fendral is like, "Well, hey, we're bringing you home," and Thor is like, "Well, wait a minute, I can't come home." And and Thor talks about how Odin is dead because of him, and like, no. Lady Sith says, "Your father's not dead; he's just sleeping." And Thor's like, "Say what now?" so so Loki very upset that Heimdall had let the warriors and Sith make their way to Earth, and Heimdall is still questioning how Loki was able to go on and get the the frost giants to eventually uh, not be seen by him because he knows that Loki did it. And so Heimdall is to now be accused of treason by Loki. And Heimdall is like, well, okay, so now I don't have to obey you. So if anything, I can just attack you. And Loki goes on and turns the casket of ancient winters on Heimdall, and he's now frozen. So Coulson and the rest of the Shield team are to make it to the site of which that is to have the Bifrost marking onto the ground, and all of a sudden there ends up occurring another Bifrost uh, thing coming down next to Coulson and all the Shield agents, and it ends up becoming the Destroyer. Coulson is to weirdly assume that maybe this has to be probably something of Stark's, and really Coulson doesn't really know because if anything, like they don't know if he's a friend or foe. So Coulson gets onto this megaphone and basically just tells this guy who is the destroyer, yeah, you're having unregistered weapons technology, so uh, if anything, kind of reveal yourself to us. And so the destroyer goes on and uses its facial blast weapon. I don't know what exactly to call this, and blasts away at the shield members to eventually make its way to town. Everybody is trying to prepare for the destroyer to come here, and so the warriors and Sith are going on and be like, "Well, hey Thor, like you can go on and fight alongside of us." And Thor's like, "No, like if anything, I'm mortal now. So if anything, I'll just go and I'll be much more of a risk to you, or I'll probably get one of you killed." So Thor realizes the only thing that he can do is actually just help people get to safety, and so Thor and all the other humans from Earth are trying to get everybody evacuated from this close vicinity because they realize that there's going to be a battle going on. Eric goes on and gets through this diner and explains to everybody to get out of here. So the destroyer goes on and destroys a 7-Eleven gas station, which is kind of funny. So I'm like, I'm wondering who the sponsor was in this film. So, or maybe if that was the sponsor of this film, or maybe it was just a coincidence. So, the first plan that they tried to do is that Volstagg was to run, and both Fengrel and Hogan were to chuck him, but eventually the destroyer goes on and hits Fengrel or Volstagg and chucks him onto this back of this car. And as the destroyer hovers over Volstagg, here's where Lady Sith comes flying and stabs into the back of the destroyer, thinking that, oh yeah, I took him out. Oh yeah, I did really well. Because Lady Sith was going on and telling the Warriors 3 to distract the destroyer as she was getting in position, which this is what the attack she tries to do. All of a sudden, the destroyer goes on and completely rotates its entire body from being the position of here to then all of a sudden having its head and its arms completely rotate to then be like above here, where Sith is now like on top of him. So he completely rotated his entire body to almost be like a weird like position like this, with Sith still being on top of him. So Sith goes on, takes out, or the destroyer goes on and takes out Sith, and just starts to attack all of the warriors and is taking them all out. So the more that the destroyer starts blasting away at all the warriors, to the point where now Thor is telling Sith that they've done everything that they can, and at this point now there's nothing left for them to do but to try to basically just get out of here. That they need to go on and tell the story of this and live. So Thor tells the warriors that he has a plan and for them to just get out of here. Here's where Thor drops the shield and he wants to basically sacrifice himself, hoping that that sacrifice will lead to the earth being saved. So Thor goes on and takes a moment to be like, brother, I don't know what I've done to wrong you, but whatever it is, I am truly sorry. But these people are innocent. Taking their lives will gain nothing, so take mine and end this. So Thor gets ever so close to the destroyer, and the destroyer seems like it's almost like backing down and is walking away. Then all of a sudden, the destroyer just backhands Thor and he goes flying. So Thor is all scraped and scrapped up and is to now be on the ground. Jane goes to Thor, and Thor is like, okay, it's over now, you're safe. And then Thor dies. There's a tear that emerges from there's a tear that emerges from Odin's eye even while he's sleeping. Because supposedly Odin is to know what all is going on even while he's in Odin's sleep, is what is supposedly to be said there by Laufey at some point. When Laufey is on top of Odin, and he opens up one of Odin's eyes, because of course he can only open one of them anyways. So here's the point where we reflect back on whoever holds this hammer shall possess the power of Thor, if he be worthy. So All of a sudden, Mjolnir is starting to shake. Oh, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen, Mew Mew? So here's where Mjolnir comes flying into the air, and of course, what's gonna happen here is that all of a sudden, Mjolnir is gonna latch onto Thor. Thor is gonna get electrified, and that's what kind of defibs him back to life and has him become Thor once more. Uh, I think also as Jane and Eric watches now, Thor actually becomes costume wielding Thor. At one point, Jane is like, "Oh my god!" Like she's gonna nut, or she's gonna blurst. She's gonna blurst, everybody. She's gonna blurst. So, so Thor goes on and takes out the destroyer to kind of have him fall down. Then all of a sudden, it seems that there's like this weird tornado that occurs as Thor is going on and spiraling his hammer so quickly that it kind of creates this tornado. And both Destroyer and Thor kind of caught into this tornado. The more that the Destroyer keeps blasting at Thor and Thor keeps dodging the attacks, at some point the way that Thor defeats the Destroyer is to put its own attack on him, and that destroys him and has him go falling. Thor makes his way back to Jane and Eric, and Jane is like, "Wait a minute, is that what you normally look like?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's a really good look." Funny enough, she will at some point in the future be getting this look herself because she will eventually become a Thor herself in Thor Love and Thunder. So, Thor has explained to the warriors that they need to get to the Bifrost site so that way they can have words with Thor's brother Loki. And here's where Coulson goes on to say, it's like, well, hey, like you haven't been telling me the absolute truth. And here's where Thor goes and says, like, well, from this day forth, call me as your ally, and uh, and I'll be able to protect your world, and uh, and if anything, you should probably go on and return all of Jane Foster's equipment. And Coulson's like, well, of course she should, because if anything, she's going to need it because we have more research for her to do. At some point, they'll go on and explain where Jane is in other movies. They'll have to kind of write her off. At some point, they'll go on and they'll explain that like she's going on and she's doing research here and there and whatever. Like they do write her off in other films, in other Avengers movies. But anyways, so Thor goes on and grabs Jane and says like, "Hey, do you want to go on? And you want to see that Einstein Rosen bridge that you talk so much about?" Thor goes on and grabs Jane, and the two of them fly off. So Loki welcomes Bifrost giants into Asgard, and Thor is crying out for Heimdall to ask to open the Bifrost, which of course Heimdall is now frozen. Thor is kind of weirded out because Heimdall isn't answering, and they've realized that at this point they're probably now stranded. So Thor keeps calling out for Heimdall. Heimdall finally breaks through his being frozen and attacks the frost giants. And then a very weakened Heimdall goes on and opens the Bifrost, and then the Asgardians realize that, okay, we can go back home now. So Thor turns to Jane and explains that she will not be able to go to Asgard now, but if anything, he will come back for her, and he promises. Deal, deal. We'll eventually make our way into Thor: The Dark World, and Jane uh, will be infected with the God. What was it called? Um, the ether. I think it's the ether. Is that right? She'll get infected with the ether, and will be forced to go to Asgard anyways. And she'll meet up with Odin and Frigga and all these other people, and they'll have to extract or whatever. They'll have to remove the ether from her, and then they'll have to explain what the ether frickin' even is. Um, if even I'm saying that right, the thing that they take from her in the second movie. You can correct me in the comments below. You like. Either way, I think there's a lot of people like because I had just gone and just reviewed Lanterns. I really didn't put as much effort like I did in this. Um, but also it's just like if I don't like something, there's probably also going to be a pretty good chance that I'm not going to put as much effort into it. Or also, like immediately when probably people are hear how I feel about things, they're probably not going to care about the rest of this video. Like I would be, I was shocked that I did like the Attack on Titans review, and like actually the average time that someone was to go on and watch that was actually a pretty decent amount of time. I was shocked about that. Because like wow, actually somebody actually watched a good chunk of the video. Um, because I'm clearly just so used to me finding out that the average time of which is to be like the first like 6 seconds or 10 seconds. So I'm like, man, it's surprising to have people that actually did watch a good chunk of the video. Because I'm also just very happy um, when I feel like I did something right at some point. But anyways, so soon as the Asgardians make their way back to Asgard, the Thor and the warriors and every so Thor says to to get whoever they can back to the healing room, and so Laufey is to make his way to Thor's bedside and then be on top of him. And here's where Laufey goes on and talks about the whole like, yeah, Odin, I'm sure you can go on and I hope you can actually see and hear everything of what's going on, even though you're sleeping. So Laufey goes on and says, like, yeah, like now you're gonna know that a frost giant had killed you, and then boom, we have Loki that goes on to say, it's like, well, yeah, now you're gonna know an Asgard had killed you. And I know that's not. I know I'm not going for word, but I'm also kind of rushing here. I'm rushing. So so Loki is to go on and turn to Frigga and say that the Frost Giants will pay for what they done to almost to have tried to have killed Odin. And then all of a sudden Thor comes in and Frigga is just so happy that Thor has returned, but Thor is like, well, hey, like I need to talk to Loki and I need to talk to him about what he has gone on to do and the truth of what he has all gone on and already done. Anyways, so because if anything on Earth, Loki had gone on to send the destroyer to kill Thor and everybody. And in weirdly, Loki is to say it's like, oh no, that was Odin doing that, not even me. And Thor is like, just cut the crap. So Loki leaves because he wants to go on and destroy Jotunheim. So he makes his way to the Bifrost Bridge. So Loki turns on the Bifrost and keeps it open, and it's now to the point where also Loki is to use the casket to kind of freeze the the weapon to keep the Bifrost open in place. So Thor tries to use his hammer to try to break through the ice, uh but Loki bats him back. So here's where Loki starts about how he wants to have been a worthy father, or worthy father, a worthy son to his father, and how maybe at this point their father would have loved him enough to want him to be the true heir to the throne, and and Thor says about how Loki should not go on and kill the frost giants, and so Loki's like, wait a minute, weren't you the guy in the first part of the movie that wanted to go on and kill all the frost giants? What has changed? And and Thor is like, well, I've changed, and Loki's like, well, so have I. And so as Thor starts fighting with Loki, here's where Loki says, I never wanted the throne. I only wanted to be your equal. Thor doesn't want to fight, and at some point Loki is to go on and ask what turned Thor so soft. Don't tell me it was that woman. Maybe after I go on and I finish here, I'll visit her myself. So at some point Thor goes on and gets thrown outside of the Rosen Bridge, and then Loki appears on top of him, and then all of a sudden there's duplicates of himself all over the place. Thor uses its lightning power to find out who is the real Loki and take him out. Thor goes on and takes Mjolnir and puts it onto Loki's chest, keeping him down onto the Rainbow Bridge. And so Loki is to watch as Thor is trying to figure out what to do. And Loki is to say with all of Thor's strength that there's nothing for him to really do. And all of a sudden, then Thor goes on and reaches out a hand for Mjolnir, and he gets it. And then all of a sudden, Thor starts breaking the Rosen Bridge, or the Rainbow Bridge. And Loki thinks that Thor is crazy. It's like, wait a minute. Like, if you break this bridge, you'll never see her again. And Thor goes on to say to Loki, it's like or bleh. Thor goes on and says to Jane, like, forgive me, Jane. So Thor goes on and completely breaks the bridge, and so we start to see the Bifrost just floating off and sinking and falling off. So, shortly thereafter that, here's where Thor and Loki start slipping off the bridge because the impact of the Bifrost bridge falling, as well as also like Thor at the very. All right, I don't know where exactly this stopped. So I'll kind of back up just a little bit. So the Bifrost is now lost, and as Thor had gone on to take Mjolnir and continue to smash to break the Rosen Bridge, Thor is to have Loki creep up behind him closer and closer, and then the two of them fall over. And Thor is now holding on to the Rainbow Bridge, as now Loki is hanging on by the staff, as Thor is now hanging on to uh Loki, and all of a sudden then Odin appears off of his Odin sleep. So Loki is trying to convince Odin that he was to try to do everything for his father, and Odin says to Loki, it's like, well, no, like, no, Loki. So eventually Loki just realizes that he's never going to get his father's love, or that he realizes that he'll never do anything right to earn his father's love. So Loki starts to loosen his grip from the staff, and then eventually fades away into nothingness. And Thor starts to cry out, and so the next thing after this, we see a number of people all just kind of eating meals, like, because also at some points, like, we'd see that Volstagg at one scene is to just be pounding out food, and Fendrel's like, how can you eat at a time like this? It's like, I'm sorry, or Volstagg is like, I'm sorry, it's just how I deal with things. So everybody's around this table, and at some point, uh, Thor leaves, and Lady Sith starts talking to Frigga. It's like, well, hey, how is he? And so Sith talks about how Thor is to miss and mourn his brother, but also miss Jane, miss the mortal. And Thor starts to make his way to Odin, and Odin starts to talk about how Thor will become a wise king, and Thor is like, well, there'll be no wiser king than you, and Thor is to say, I have a lot to learn, and and that Thor says that he hopes that he'll make Odin proud one day, and Odin turns to Thor, it's like, well, you've always made me proud. So Thor then goes on and then makes his way to Heimdall. It's like, well, I guess Earth is lost to us. And Heimdall is like, well, there's always hope. There's always an Avengers movie. They'll figure out that Einstein Rosenbridge thing. They'll figure that out. Like, they don't really go on, they don't really explain how Thor is able to get back to Earth. They don't really explain that properly. But if anything, you also have to assume that, like, Odin probably is to be powerful enough to figure out some way to get Thor back on Earth. But anyways, so Odin's son Thor. God, I'm sorry. I'm messing up these names a lot. I always mess it up. Like, one, it's tired. Uh, two, it's just like too long videos sometimes. Um, I know that this is going to be way past the length of this video, anyways. But whatever. Like, if anything, I don't think that this is going to do very well, anyways. So I'm just fine with it. Like, I'm okay if this doesn't do well. But anyways, let's cut to the best of this or the rest of this. Heimdall goes in and asks how like what is going on with Jane. Heimdall goes and says that Jane is looking for him, and so Thor is to kind of overhear what Heimdall is talking about, and then they kind of just fade into credits. So the last thing we see is to be an end credit scene where we find that Eric Selvig is to be making his way to Nick Fury to try and figure out the cosmic cube. And Eric is like, well, hey, I have a lot of things going on, interdimensional wormholes, like I got a lot of things on my plate. But as Fury goes on to show the cosmic cube to Eric, Eric's like, well, like something like this is worth a look. And then in a reflection, we see that actually Eric is actually being controlled by Loki, and that'll turn into eventually Avengers and the better understanding of how that all plays out. And we'll eventually get to see that Loki ends up getting Hawkeye to be controlled, and see how Hawkeye will become uh, beneficial in having Loki take Hawkeye of all people. You couldn't have gone on and gotten a stronger Avenger. You couldn't have gotten Hulk. You could have gotten a Captain America or somebody a little bit stronger. Anyways, uh, but anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. I hope to fuse these clips together. Man, this is gonna be one of those really just late at night videos that I just hook out there. Um, oh well, like at least this will be done. I'm not sure how this one is gonna go. If anything, the Green Lantern one I was a little bit more sure about. This one, like, it just didn't come out right. Um, this one was kind of like it really should not have been difficult to do. This movie is very simplistic, probably compared to the Green Lantern movie. But yeah, I probably should have tried to accomplish this earlier. Um, I could have a number of excuses, but like I've just been too lazy lately. I've really been very procrastinating, so that's my fault. Um, Either way, like I don't know, maybe also I was to probably just be like, I don't think this one's gonna do any well, so I probably just that's probably the way of which that I was just to kind of approach this is just like, yeah, like whatever I'm gonna do, it's not gonna turn out as good as I want it to. So that's probably why this is to be the way it is. Anyways, I'm sorry. Maybe someday I'll be able to have a really good version of one of these films reviewed. If I just keep trying to review them, maybe I'll get a better cut of them. But either way, I think it's about that time to say I'm going to get the heck out of here so I can fuse these clips together and then upload this. I really did not want to upload this in the middle of the night, but I unfortunately think that it's going to end up being that way. Uh, because I'd hate to try to get this done and then wait forever or the next following day when I was going to turn back around and try to do 2 projects today, which I don't think is going to happen, unfortunately. Yeah. I wish I could do this better right now. It's just because I really don't want to get frustrated. Um, because like again, um, it's a process, and I'm trying to trust the process. Um, but I'm also realizing how, yeah, at first people were very interested in the content, but now things are starting to kind of slip through the cracks, and like I wish that everything that I chose this time around, like every single thing, was to be all bangers and everybody loved every bit of content, but it's just gonna like it's not gonna be perfect. Like plus also on the other channel when I started off on that, like I did really good at choices. Like this one, this time around, like I'm still to just kind of make these decisions based uh on just like, well, like I'm gonna do this because I never did this on the other channel. And that's not the best reasoning for going on and covering this stuff. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here because I know this video is gonna be long anyways. So goodbye everybody. Bye everybody. Hopefully we'll cover the Dark World, because that seemed to have been hugely taken off from that last channel for some odd reason. I don't know why. Hopefully, uh, we'll go on and get some other superhero project that'll do better next time around. I'm hoping maybe Into the Spider Verse does better this time around. Maybe Across the Spider Verse when I finally get to that on this channel. Because again, I'm going to try to cover every one of the superhero movies and not just stop at one point. Because I'm going to go on and even cover some of the stuff that I didn't cover on the other channel. Because I was going on and I was having thumbnails ready for all those, and it just eventually led to this transition. So I'm going to transition out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.